Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you are watching this live, you should know that in the corner there is a live chat of which a group of people are already joining. A little crop of potatoes is growing there. And if you want to join in, if you are watching live, and talk along to the stories we're reading tonight, feel free to do so now. Because that is what we're doing tonight. We're reading live folklore here on Varietal Literature's YouTube page. And specifically, we're reading folklore from the Basque culture. And it's all going to focus on a thing called the Tartaro, which is a Cyclops. I don't even really think I need to give that much of a frame, because it pretty much just is a Cyclops. If you're not watching this live, though, down in the description below, there will be a timestamp where you can go and click on the various stories if you want to jump ahead to whatever story interests you the most. One thing I will say is tonight we're going to be looking at stories of the Tartaro, but we are going to be looking at some variants of similar stories. They are different enough that I found them interesting enough to read them both. So they all have different titles, but some of them are variants on one we've already read. Anyways. Anyhow, sorry, I got distracted by the chat there. Which is a great reason why you can jump ahead if you want. All I'm going to do here is say hello to the chat. I'm going to say a little bit about the stories and where they come from, and then we will get to the reading. There we go. All right, let's see what we're talking about in chat. Unfortunately, Jumpstore has a migraine. Ooh. Gross, but has taken care to note that the tea they're drinking tonight is cosmic bliss. It's very relaxing and soothing for the soul and their migraine. Lizzie Rose is in the chat as well. Good to see you, Lizzie. Uncle Kitty is here. GS is here. Good to see you, folks. Oh, and Hira is here to tell us that her mother, Tammy Morelli, who's normally in here, is too tired to do live stream today because she's been pretty sleep deprived because of an arm injury. I'm sorry to hear that, but that's okay. You join in as you're able to, Tammy. Uncle Kitty says, I'm really interested in this one. I don't get access to much Basque stuff. I don't either. This is, I didn't even know there was a specific collection of it. Like, I'm familiar with the Basque culture, sort of. Like, I'm aware of it. And some of the major details. But no, I wasn't really aware of it in a folklore sense until this week when I found this book. And then when I discovered that there was a whole section on a Cyclops, I was like, I've never done anything on a Cyclops. That's great. All right. I don't actually have much to say here other than I'm just going to give you some basics here of what Basque culture isn't, because there's some common misconceptions. The first thing is Basque, in terms of the kind of land where you find Basque people, it's kind of like southeast France, northeast Spain. It's like in that area, or northwest Spain. I think I'm saying that right. Now I'm double checking myself. Is sort of the region where it is. Basque itself is not a subculture of Spanish culture or French culture. It's its own culture. I mean, a lot of Europe, to be honest, the European countries, they have their own cultures, but they also tend to be several different conquered cultures in a trench coat. So that is the weirdness of it if you're trying to run this along geographic borders. The language, the Basque language, is a distinct language. It's not a variant of French or Spanish the way that many websites I was looking at today wanted to say they were. People, you don't need to look very far to find out that's not the case. You can't just say stuff like that. I guess you can. It's the internet. Anyhow, Basque culture is still, informed by that area. So there's probably things that you would associate to Spanish culture or French culture that really is more associated to Basque culture. But I won't be the cultural cachet or cultural ambassador for this because it's not my culture exactly. So, but I did want to sort of cover those things off, those common misconceptions off. It's a distinct subculture in Europe that I believe predates the countries it's associated with. So with that in mind, we are reading from a book called Basque Legends by Reverend Wentworth Webster, which is such a 19th century kind of name. The book itself takes a bit of an odd form of prose. We'll see how you guys feel about it. It is collected stories from the Basque culture. And all the stories we're going to read today relate in one way or another to the Tartaro, which was hard to find a pronunciation of. So if you are Basque and you're like, that's not how that's pronounced, I apologize. Looking it up online, I got an Italian, Spanish, and French pronunciation, all of which were different. So we're somewhere in the middle here. So with that said, I don't think I really need to say much more about this other than to say I hope you know what a Cyclops is, but if you don't, it's a one-eyed beast, usually quite large, usually quite strong, and usually quite dumb. As a creature, they track back to at least ancient Greece. I mean, that's probably the earliest we know about it, but anything written down in ancient Greece, most people agree, probably existed in oral storytelling far before that, so it's hard to say how old it is. But big one-eyed beasts, a common thing, but not a super common thing for the folklore we read. The folklore we read tends to fill the role that we're going to see filled here with trolls, or sometimes ogres. But in our stories, it tends to be trolls, and they tend to have a lot of heads, not one eye or whatever else. But these are very distinctly about the one-eyed beast. Anyhow, that's enough of me talking. We have actually quite a bit of story to get through today. I don't know if I'm going to read all the stories. The last one, even the author admits, is probably more of a local variant of a story about a troll, and I agree. But anyways, I don't want to waste the time. So let me wet my throat and get ourselves into some Cyclops stories. Zevia. No. Let's get a little bit of atmosphere in here. Our first tale about the Tartaro is from Basque Legends by Reverend Wentworth Webster, where all our stories are going to come from, and it is a brief but memorable one. Once upon a time, there was a son of a king who, for the punishment of some fault, became a monster. He could become a man again, but only by marrying. One day he met a young girl who refused him because she was so frightened at him, and the Tartaro wanted to give her a ring which she would not accept. However, he sent it to her by a young man. As soon as the ring was upon her finger, it began to say, "Thou there, and I here." And it kept always crying out this, and the Tartaro pursued her continually. And as the young girl had such a horror of him, she cut off her finger and the ring and threw them into a large pond. And there the Tartaro followed it and drowned himself. Oh, hello, Witchery. Now, this is a really good opener on the choice of the assembler of this, because it has all the pieces of what will be longer stories we see. The monster itself pursuing someone, although this is the only time where it's sort of a Beauty and the Beast situation. Usually it's just a monster. You'll see repetition of this ring thing, and people having to cut their finger off. What you will see above all else, which isn't unusual for other big monster lore, but it really seems to be the Tartaro thing, is tricking it into killing itself. All right. Now this next story, and you'll start to get a feel for how this collection is written. So there's a little bit of oddity here. The author talks directly to you and is reprinting basically letters and accounts that he collected. Jumpstore says, I would have pawned the ring. True. So this is just called Madame d'Abady's version. Or d'Abady's version. It is so different from the version it is that it is very much its own story, in my opinion. But we'll see how you feel about it. It's also a shorter one. The longer ones are coming. Our next story is Madame d'Abady's version of the story we just read. And it also obviously comes to us from Basque Legends by Reverend Wentworth Webster. Our next story was communicated by Madame d'Abady to the Société des Sciences et des Arts de Bayonne. The narrator, Madame l'Abbé, Hewi or Gare? I don't know how you would say that name. The parish priest of Esquil and La Soule. In my infancy, I often heard from my mother the story of Tartaro. He was a colossus, which is the more Greek term for him, with only one eye in the middle of his forehead. He was a shepherd and a hunter, but a hunter of men. Every day he ate sheep. Then after a snooze, everyone who had the misfortune to fall into his hands. His dwelling was a huge barn, the thick walls, a high roof, and a very strong door, which he alone knew how to open. His mother, the old witch, lived in one corner of the garden in a hut constructed of turf. One day, a powerful young man was caught in the snares of the Tartaro, who carried him off to his house. This young man saw the Tartaro eat a whole sheep. I should warn you, these stories have no animal fares well in these stories. None. So, I should have put that at the front. I forgot to mention that. Content warning. Every animal dies. This young man saw the Tartaro eat a whole sheep, and he knew that he was accustomed to take a snooze, and that after that his own turn would come. In his despair, he said to himself that he must do something. Directly, the Tartaro began to snore. He put the spit into the fire, and he made it red hot. And he plunged it into the giant's one big eye. Immediately, he leapt up and began to run after the man who had injured him, but it was impossible to find him. "You shall not escape. It is all very well to hide yourself," said he, "but I alone know the secret how to open this door." The Tartaro opened the door halfway and let the sheep out between his legs. The young man took a big bell off the ram and puts it around his neck, throws over his body the skin of the sheep, which the giant had just eaten, and walks on all fours to the door. Well, the Tartaro examines him by feeling him and perceives the trick, clutches a hold of the skin, but the young man slips off the skin, dives between his legs, and runs off. Immediately, the mother of the Tartaro meets him and says to him, "Oh, you lucky young fellow! You have escaped the cruel tyrant. Take this ring as a remembrance of your escape." Well, the boy accepts, puts the ring on his finger, and immediately the ring begins to cry out, "Hibanook, Hibanook!" Or, "Thou hast me here, thou hast me here." Tartaro pursues and is on the point of catching him when the young man, maddened with fright and not being able to pull off the ring, takes out his knife and cuts off his own finger. He throws it away and thus escapes the pursuit of the Tartaro. In the other versions, the young man goes into the forest with some pigs, meets the Tartaro there, and is carried by him home, blinds him with the red-hot spit, and escapes by letting himself down through a garret window. The Tartaro pursues, guided by this ring, which at last he throws to the young man to put on, and when it cries out as above, the young man cuts off his finger, throws it down a precipice, or into a bog, where the ring still cries out, and the Tartaro, following it, is dashed to pieces and drowned. GS says, "Wonder if Mum is a Cyclops, or did I miss that part?" I think they said she was a witch, but I don't know if she's both. Jumpstore says, "Lol, are my Jewish stereotypes showing?" You know, I think a lot of that is just people, immigrants, right? Like, just when you're going to new lands, you got to be careful with money. And also just bigotry. So no, I think you're just being smart. Okay. This is a longer tale, and it is bonkers. I don't know. We're going to read this version of the tale, which I think is the weirdest version of the tale. And after this, we're going to read a markedly different version of what is obviously inspired by the same tale, of this tale that is also a longer story. But I don't really know what you're meant to take away from this version of the tale. It is... Anyone who argues that folklore, I've said this many times on the stream, but anyone who argues that folklore is a vehicle for people to communicate social morality or eternal moral rules or something like that over time, you tell them to read Errua, the Madman, and come back and explain what the moral of this story was. Because it's baffling. It's exciting. It's wild. It's outright psychopathic, but it is baffling. Our next story is called Errua, the Madman. And Madman is right. It comes to us also from Basque Legends by Reverend Wentworth Webster. And it also is about the Tartaro, but in a much more tangential way. It takes a while to get there. Like many others in the world, there was a man and a woman who had a son. He was very wicked and did nothing but mischief, and was of a thoroughly depraved disposition. The parents decided that they must send him away, and the lad was quite willing to set off. He set out then and goes far, far, further than that, far away, till he comes to a city and asks if they want a servant. They wanted one in a certain house. So he goes there. They settle their terms at so much a month, and that the one who is not satisfied, and this is important because it comes up in both stories, and it is absolutely bonkers. The one who is not satisfied should strip the skin off the other's back. Let me say that whole sentence again. Or paragraph, really. He comes to a city and asks if they want a servant. They wanted one in a certain house, and he goes there. So they settle their terms at so much a month, so much money a month. And that one who is not satisfied should strip the skin off the other's back. The master sends his servant to the forest to get the most crooked pieces of wood he can find. Near the forest there was a vineyard. What does the servant do but cut it all up and carries it to the house? The master asks him where the wood is, and he shows him the vine wood cut up. Wow. The master said nothing to him, but he was not pleased. And though this tale does not say it directly, it's pretty obvious he cut up his vineyard. Next day, the master says to him, "Take the cows to such a field, and don't break any hole in the fence." Now, just as a framing here, cattle have a tendency to kick things sometimes, or bump them, or whatever else. So when you're taking a big herd of them through some gate of the fence, it would have been rather difficult and challenging to make sure none of all the cattle you were watching would kick any hole in the fence. What does the lad do? Well, he cuts all the cows into little pieces. It's all the stories are like this. He cuts all the cows into little pieces and throws them bit by bit into the field. The master was still more angry, but he could not say anything for fear of having his skin stripped off. So what does he do? He buys a herd of pigs and sends his servants to the mountain with the herd. The master knew quite well that there was a Tartaro in this mountain, but he sends them there all the same. And our madman goes walking on and on and on. He arrives at a little hut. The Tartaro's house was quite close to his, and the pigs of the Tartaro and those of the madman used to go out together. The Tartaro said one day to him,
Will you make me a wager as to who will throw a stone the farthest?"
Well, The madman accepted the wager, and that evening our madman became very sad. While he was at his prayers, an old woman appeared to him and asked him,
"What is the matter with you? Why are you so sad?"
and he tells her the wager that he made with the Tartaro. The old woman says to him,
"Oh, if it is only that, it is nothing."
and so she gives him a bird and says to him,
"Instead of a stone, throw a bird."
The madman was very glad at this. The next day he does as the old woman told him. The Tartaro's stone went enormously far, but at last it fell. But that madman's bird, when he tossed it up, it never came down at all. The Tartaro was astonished that he had lost his wager when he was so sure to win. And so he made another. Which of the two should throw a bar of iron the farthest? The madman accepted again, and he was in his little house sadly in prayer that night. The old woman appeared again, and she asked him,
"What's the matter with you?" "I have made a wager again. Which of the two will throw the bar of iron farthest? And I am very sorry for having made this wager." "If it is only that, it is nothing. When you take a hold of the bar of iron, say, 'Rise up, bar of iron, here to Salamanca.'"
I am going to read the footnote on this because this would mean absolutely nothing to us without it. Salamanca was the reputed home of witchcraft and devilry in de Lancre's time, which was 1610. He is constantly punning on the word, and it is because Salamanca. See also this, whatever. Anyways, the point is, it's a place far away, and it's a place of witchcraft. Now, why is she telling him to say this? That gets explained by the story. Next day, the Tartaro takes his terrible bar of iron and throws it fearfully far. The young man could hardly lift up one end, and he says, "Rise up, bar of iron, here in Salamanca." And when the Tartaro heard this, he cried out,
"Oh, I give up the wager. You have won."
And he takes the bar of iron away from him.
"My father and mother live at Salamanca. Don't throw, I beg of you, implore you, for you will crush them."
Well, our madman goes away very happy, and the Tartaro says to him again,
"I will pull up the biggest oak in the forest, and you pull up another."
Well, the madman says yes, but of course, again, down there at prayers, he becomes sad again. The old woman, finding him again, says to him,
"What's the matter with you this time?"
And so he tells her the wager he has made with the Tartaro, and how he will pull up an oak. And so the old woman gives him 3 balls of thread, and tells him to begin and tie them to all the oaks in the forest. Next day, the Tartaro pulls up his oak, an enormously big one. Root ball as big as a city. And the madman then began to tie, and to tie, and to tie the stumps of all the trees still standing in the forest. Well, the Tartaro asks him,
"Oh, what are you doing that for?"
You pulled up one, but I all of these." Well, the Tartaro replies,
No, 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 no! What shall I do to fatten my pigs without acorns? You have won. You have won the wager.
The Tartaro did not know what to think about it, and saw that he'd found one cleverer than himself, and so he asks himself if he will come, the boy rather, and spend the night at his house. Well, the madman says, yes. He goes to bed with the Tartaro, but he knew that there was a dead man under the bed of the Tartaro. How did he know this? Don't worry about it. When the Tartaro was asleep, what does the madman do? He places the dead man from under the bed at the Tartaro's side and gets under the bed himself in place where the dead man was. And in the middle of the night, the Tartaro gets up and he takes his terrible bar of iron, and as hard as he could give them, he showered blows upon blows, ping, pan, ping, pan, as long and as hard as he could possibly give them to the man in the bed. Well, the Tartaro gets up as usual, after his beatings, and goes to see his pigs. And the madman also comes out from under the bed, and he goes to see the pigs too. Well, when he wanders out the door, the Tartaro is quite astounded to see the madman coming, and does not know what to think of it. He says to himself that he has to do with a cleverer than he. But he asks him if he has slept well. He answers, yes, very well, only felt a few flea bites. Well, their pigs had got mixed, and as they were fat, he had to separate them in order to go away with his. The Tartaro asked the madman what marks his pigs had, and the madman says to him, mine have some of them 1 mark, and some of them 2 marks. Well, they set to work to look at them, and they all had these same marks. So our madman goes off then with all the hogs. He goes walking on and on and on with all his pigs. And he comes to a town where it was just market day. He sells them all except 2, keeping, however, all the tails which he puts in his pocket. And as you may think, he was always in fear of the Tartaro. He sees him coming down from the mountain. So he kills one of his hogs, one of the 2 that he had not sold. He puts the entrails in his own bosom under his waistcoat. Now it came that there was a group of men near the road, and as he passed them, he made sure they saw him take out his knife, stab it into his chest, and gouge out those pig bowels as if they were his own. At that point, the madman exclaimed he was running much faster than before, with his pig in front of them. When the Tartaro comes up to these men then later, he asks if they have seen such a man. Wide-eyed, they answer, yes, he was running fast, and in order to go faster, he just stabbed himself and threw away his bowels, and still he went on all the faster. While the Tartaro wanted to keep up. So in order to go faster, he thrust his knife into his body and falls stark dead. Now at this point, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that this story is about a servant potentially having the flesh stripped off their back. But we come back to that part of the story. Well, the madman goes on to his master's. Near the house there was quite a marsh, full of mud. He then puts his live pig into it, and then plants all the tails that he had kept as well. He enters the house and says to the master that he is there with his pigs. The master is astounded to see him, having sent him up the hill to see the Tartaro. He did not expect him to come back. He asks him, where are the pigs then? And he says to him, they have gone into the mud.
They were so tired.
Both go out and begin to get the real pig out. And between the two, they pull it out very well. And they try to do the same thing with the others, but they kept pulling out nothing but the tails. Well, the madman says,
"Oh, you see how fat they are. That is why the tails come out alone."
And he sends the servant to fetch the spade and the hoe. Instead of bringing them, he begins to beat the mistress. Whack, whack! And he cries to the master, "One or both?" The master says to him, "Both, both!" And then he beats the servant maid almost to pieces. There's a bunch of people. I'm not looking at the chat, but I bet there's a bunch of people in chat who felt like they might have a grasp on this story. And I'm sure they're second guessing themselves now. He goes then to the master, taking with him the spade and the hoe, and he sets to beating him with the spade and hoe until he can no longer defend himself. And then he thrashes the skin off his back, takes his pig, and goes off home to his father and mother. And as he lived well, he died well too. Witchery says, me having handled... I was thinking of you, actually, Witchery, here with this. Having handled cows. I mean, they won't kick the fence unless you're terrible, but okay, this is an option too, I guess. It is also possible that these were less domesticated than modern cows. Uncle Kitty says, that was living well. I don't know. I mean, what is the perspective of this story? Because the story goes out of its way to call it a madman. So it's someone who's aware that there's madness here. Go figure. I see Lizzie Rose is talking about, sometimes folklore is about morality. Sure, I mean, sometimes folklore is about morality, sometimes about entertainment, as you point out. Sometimes it's about preserving history, whether or not it's real history or not, just preserving some concept of it. But sometimes it's this. And I don't know what this is. Chum Store says, I missed the drop acid here prompt, I'm afraid. It really does have feeling. I don't know if you folks have ever read Naked Lunch, but it really does have that vibe where you're like, oh, did the story change? I'm going to briefly turn on my air conditioner. It's getting quite warm here. And we're going to unlock the shiny Rory. I won't talk about all the variants of it. Now, this story, before I get into it, it's a similar length to the last story. It is in many ways the same story, but structured in a way that makes more sense to me. It's a more coherent version of the culmination of events. But there's two things that I think if you're interested in narrative and folklore's history and whatever, there's two things to notice here. And it's sort of like how folklore plays off itself over time and region and whatever else. What we see here is a more traditional structure that we see in folklore applied to the madness we just read. And in doing so, it makes a bit more sense and has a much clearer moral core. There's a much more... the point of the story is a lot clearer in the second one here. But that's not a high bar to cross, because what was the first one? I do think some of it is cultural elements are lost on us. There is one point in here that is obviously a cultural thing, because I do not know what it means, and my Googling did not help. Lizzie Rose says, this is entertainment. Cue the "are you not entertained" meme. I do think it is basically at its root. When they say madman, they just mean someone who is stupidly courageous. And I think it is just sort of a fun story for somebody who did all the wrong things and succeeds. All right. Let's carry on, because we got story to get through. Our next story is called The Three Brothers, The Cruel Master, and the Tartaro. And it is, in many ways, the same story we just read, and in many ways a completely different structure and set of characters than that story. It also comes to us from Basque Legends by Reverend Wentworth Webster. Like many others in the world, there lived a mother with her 3 sons. They were not rich, but lived by their work. The eldest son said one day to his mother, "It would be better for us if I should go out to service." Well, the mother did not like it, but at last she let him go. So he goes off, far, far, far away, however far you're thinking it's farther, and comes to a house and asks if they want a servant. Well, they say yes, and they make their agreement, but the agreement was this. The master was to give a very high salary, 100,000 francs, but the servant was to do everything that the master ordered him, and if he did not do it, the master was to tear the skin off his back at the end of the year and to dismiss him without pay. The servant said to him, "All right, I am strong, and I will work." And on the morrow the master gives him a great deal of work, but he does it easily. In the last months of the year, the master presses him much more, and one day he sends him into a field to sow 14 bushels of wheat in the day. Well, the lad goes sadly, taking with him a pair of oxen, and he returns to the house very late in the evening, and the master says to him, "Have you done your work?" To which he says, "No." "Do you remember the agreement we made? I must tear the skin off your back. That is your salary." And so he got to work tearing the skin off his back, as he had said, and sent him away, back home, without a penny. Now his mother was in great grief at seeing him come home so thin and weak and without any money, and it must be said, without any skin on his back. And he tells what has happened. And it is at that the second brother wishes to start off at once, saying that, well, he is strong, and that he will do more work. Well, the mother did not like it, but she was obliged to let him go. He goes to the same house as his brother, and makes the same terms with the master. And when he had almost finished his year, the master again, pulling his old trick, sent him to sow 14 bushels of wheat. And he starts very early in the morning with 2 pair of oxen, but the night came before he had sown it all. The master was very glad at the sight of that. And so, his salary again was to have the skin stripped off his back, sending him away without any money at all. Just try to imagine the vexation of this mother in seeing both her sons return in this fashion. Well, the third wishes to start off at once. He assures his mother that he will bring back both the money and the skin of his back. He goes to the same gentleman. He tells this one, too, that he will give him a high salary on condition that he will do so on and so forth. Skin off the back, no wages, you know the deal he's making. He had made him work hard and well for 10 months, and then wished to truly try him. And so, as he had the other 2, he told him to sow 14 bushels of wheat before night. And the boy answers yes. And so the boy took 2 pairs of oxen, and he goes off to the field. And he plows a furrow all around the field. And he throws his 14 bushels of wheat into it. He then makes another furrow alongside it that covers up all the wheat. And at night, he goes home to the house, and the master is astonished. He asks him if he has sown it. Yes, it is all underground. You may be sure of it. This will be a little confusing. We pause for a minute to explain what has happened. He wanted him to sow it, which is to cut it down, bundle it into bushels, and put it into their cellar, basically, being underground. What he did instead is just cleave the whole field down, threw it into a big ditch, and buried it so it's technically underground and it's technically been sown. Hopefully that makes sense. Well, the master was not pleased. He had his fears that he may have to pay. The next day he sends him with 16 head of cattle to such a field and says to him, "You must take all these cattle into the field without unlocking the gate or making a gap." Well, our lad takes a hatchet, a hoe, and a fork. Now this one does more of a story, and it's possible that this is what the first story is hinting towards, and it's unclear to me. Which is that instead he's making an impossible request. You need to get them into a fenced place without breaking any break in the fence. And when he gets to the field, he kills all the cattle, one by one. And he cuts them up with the hatchet and throws them with the fork into the field. He comes at nightfall and says to his master that all the cattle are in the field as he told him. Oh, right. Sorry, Witchery, you're correct. Swatch me. Reaping is when you harvest, sown is when you plant seed. Indeed, you are correct. The master was not pleased, but he had said nothing. So that's the same story from before. The next day he told him to go to such a forest and to bring a load of wood from there, but all the sticks must be quite straight. Our lad goes off and cuts down in the chestnut copse all the young chestnut trees which his master had planted, and which were very fine ones. And he comes home, and when the master saw that, he was not pleased, and said to him, "Tomorrow you shall go again with the oxen, and you must bring a load of wood quite crooked, all quite crooked. If you bring only one straight, so much the worse for you." Well, the lad goes off and pulls up a fine vineyard, and after he had loaded his cart, he comes home, and when the master saw that, he could not say anything, but he did not know what to think of it. And so he sent the boy into the forest, and there was a Tartaro there, and all the persons and all the animals who went there, he ate them all. The master gives him 10 pigs, and also food for 10 days, telling him that the hogs would fatten themselves well there, because there were plenty of acorns, and that he must return at the end of the 10 days. Well, our lad begins, and he goes on and on and on. He meets an old woman who says to him, "Where are you going to, lad? To such a forest to fatten these pigs?" The woman says to him, "Oh, if you are not a fool, you will not go there. That horrible Tartaro will eat you." This woman was carrying a basket of walnuts on her head, and he said to her, "If you give me 2 of those walnuts, I will beat the Tartaro." And so she willingly gives them to him, and he goes on, and he meets another old woman who was winding thread, and says to him, "Where are you going, lad?" "To such a forest
Don't go there. There is a horrible Tartaro there, who will be sure to eat you and your pigs as well. I must go there all the same, and I will conquer him, if you will give me 2 of your balls of thread.
So she gives them willingly, and he goes on farther and finds a blacksmith. And he too asks him where he is going, and he answers, "To such a forest, to fatten my pigs."
You may just as well go back again. There's a terrible Tartaro here, who will be sure to eat you. If you give me a spit, I will beat him. I will give it to you willingly.
And he gives it to him with goodwill. Our lad goes on and comes to this forest. He cuts off the tails of all his pigs and hides them in a safe place. The Tartaro appears and says to him,
"How did you come here? I am going to eat you."
Well, the lad says to him,
"Eat a pig if you like, but don't touch me."
he takes his... I don't know what this means. So chat, feel free to catch me up if you know what this means. He takes his 2 nuts, rubs them one against the other, the 2 walnuts, we'll get ahead of that, says,
"I have 2 balls here, and if one of them touches you, you are dead."
The Tartaro is frightened and goes away in silence. After having eaten a pig, he comes back and says to him, I have to pause. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's just, why walnuts? Because I'll tell you, looking up on Google, deadly nuts in folklore doesn't get you much. Well, I mean, actually, it gets you quite a few results, but none that are helpful. The Tartaro comes back and says,
"We must make a wager. Which of the 2 will make the greatest heap of wood?"
Well, the Tartaro begins to cut and to cut. Then our lad leaves him alone, and when he's made a terrible big heap, he begins to go around all the trees with his balls of thread, and says to him, "You that, but I all this." Now, I don't know if it's something about the translation or the language or the writer. I don't know why everyone speaks in this very broken way, but you get all that, and I'm going to get all this. The Tartaro gives in, saying,
"He is more clever than he."
As he had stopped his 10 days, he makes in the night a great fire, and he makes his spit red hot in it. And while the Tartaro was sleeping, he plunges the spit into his only eye. And after taking his pig's tails, he goes away from the forest without any pigs, because the Tartaro had eaten one every day he was there. Near his master's house, there was a well of the fairy, and I'll read the footnote on this because it's a new one for me. Literally, Marsh of the Basque. The Puits des Fées are common in France, especially in the Lens and Gironde. In other words, it is like a known feature, a bog of sorts, it sounds like. Our lad sticks in there the tails of all his hogs, excepting one, as well as he could. He then goes running to his master, telling him that all the pigs were coming home very gaily, and that they had got so hot and coming so fast that they had all gone under the mud. "I wished to drag one out by pulling, but only the tail came way. Here it is." And he goes off then with his master to this marsh, but with the master did not dare go in there to pull them out. The stories never state this, but in case anybody's not picking up on this, it's because you would probably get sunk in too, right? That's the gist of his trick here. The master then goes off sadly with his servant home, not knowing what to think about it. And there he counts him out his 100,000 francs. And he went home proudly to his mother and his brothers. And there they lived happily, and their master was left with 100,000 francs less. And that served him right for having so much. So a more coherent version of the tale there, still very odd. But not as odd as the Madman. That is one of the most unhinged stories I've ever read on this channel. There is actually one more tale, but I don't think we're going to get to it today, called The Tartaro and Petite Paraquet. But it's... Where does it say it? Here. In the footnote for this tale, it says, only in this and one other tale is the word prince used instead of the king's son. Compared to the Gaelic of Campbell, compare the Gaelic of Campbell in this respect. This tale is probably from the French, and the Tartaro is only a giant, or what we might call a troll or an ogre. And I agree, because it doesn't really do anything that would be very specifically Tartaro, or cycloptic. And it talks more about like smelling Christian men and stuff. That's a very troll giant kind of thing. We haven't really seen that with the Tartaro. And for that reason, I was sort of on the fence about reading it at all. I didn't know how long this was going to go. I see we're at an hour, so that's probably enough for now, because it's not a short tale either. GS says, I wonder if Ghibli's Totoro was inspired by this. I doubt it. I wouldn't think that. I mean, I don't know, but I doubt it. Jump Store says, my Jewish blood is crying out in vexation not being able to make proper dirty jokes when the setup is just right there. You know, honestly, it's such a weird moment that I almost wonder if it is meant to be a dirty joke, and I'm just disregarding that. Like, is it supposed to be something about his testicles? Is that the joke? I really don't know what this means. And I wouldn't even know where to begin trying to research what it could mean. I think it might just be exactly what it is, just that he's saying that they're deadly and the Tartaro is dumb enough to believe him. But then two things. Why does it have to be two things? Why didn't he just take one walnut then, or just anything? And second, none of it makes sense. None of it makes any sense. It's so strange. Oh, Uncle Kitty has said something here. Uncle Kitty says that and the balls of strings are connected to the Basque Earth Mother Marie. Oh, is that the case? See, this is my concern with deviating from cultures I know well. It is entirely possible that it is. Jump Store says testicle jokes go way back to ancient times. Yeah, and it could be that. But that is interesting, Uncle Kitty. Is that just something you know, or is that something you looked up while we were reading? Because that would definitely go a long way. It would also go a long way to explaining who this old woman is. But though, I mean, the balls of string make sense to me. Imagine tuning into this stream and expecting answers. I feel for people who did that. Just to be clear, the point of this stream is I enjoy storytelling, and then we kind of talk about what it might mean. Uncle Kitty said, looked up while we were reading. Oh, interesting. Well, I'm going to have to pursue that lead, because there's other stuff I want to read in here. But yeah, The walnuts definitely came out of nowhere for me. But yeah, the string, I mean, string is so essential in so many things in folklore. I don't take that to be odd. Just making string was like a lot of people's full-time job. And the gist of like tying it to the trees and whatever is a good sort of grift against the big dumb giant. But yeah. Well, I'm interested to know what their source is on that, because that would make sense. Well, it wouldn't make specific sense. I still don't understand what the claim here is, but it would explain why it's walnuts in the middle of this story, like if it's an older version of that tale. I have things to read. Uncle Kitty says, not sure if the Gutenberg link is the same book. Well, I read this whole chapter. It didn't really mention in this book that I remember anything about the Basque Earth Mother in this story. But there is a little opening thing about them up here. See if I can find... It does talk a little bit. I didn't read this because, you know, I'm not sure you need me to read you information, but like, for example, there's a paragraph here where it discusses the fact that actually, there's two reasons why I don't tend to read the text. It's a very old text. And a lot of the time, these old texts, as I know from stuff that I know better, cultures I know better, you know, 19th century texts, they're often wrong. They're often just the beliefs of one particular person without much research behind them, because that was kind of the state of things when this book was written. Academia was loose, to put it mildly. But they do mention in here that the idea of a mad hero is something associated to the Tartaro. They have their own theories as to why, about how that might relate to Odysseus, who was the one who fights the Colossus. But yeah, it is interesting because it is a theme, but it doesn't really explain it. Anyhow, if you folks are curious about that, you can certainly look into it. I would say be careful about the claims of 19th century books on cultures, because they usually, not usually, like maybe, I don't know, they often anyways are, I'm trying to find the most diplomatic way to say this. They are often the kind of thing you would expect from a guy who spent most of his time in libraries, in another country, and feels like he knows the world. Like, a lot of it is work like that. It is one of the reasons, too, why there are some cultures stuff that I haven't read. It's not that I can't find collections for it. Some cultures in Europe. It's that I don't trust the collectors that are in the public domain. And I need to find stuff that's in the public domain. Jumpstore says, let's just say walnut shells look real suggestive. Alright. I think I'm just babbling now, which is a good sign that I need to go. It is quite warm. That is definitely making this worse. But that's okay. I think most people probably gave up and left at this point. Those who have remained, thank you very much. It was good to see you, Witchery. I did see that Witchery says, I have some questions about how these people who should be very familiar with butchering, thinking cutting up whole animals go. I know. I did think of that. Like, is that really easier? Also, like, am I nuts? Or would it not make more sense to build a ramp over the fence? that was something I kept thinking of. I was like, just get some, like, is butchering an entire cattle herd really the better path than just building some rocks up? Maybe putting a board or some leaf material and trying to lead them up over a ramp. But I think the point is that it is a bit of a crazy thing to do. I think that's the theme of all these stories. Anyways, I feel like I barely processed these stories, and I'm sure later in the week I'll kick myself about some things I should have figured out or said in the stream, but that is how it goes sometimes. Tammy, I hope you feel better as far as the rest. Jump Store, GS, Uncle Kitty, Witchery, Lizzie Rose, Hura, and anybody else who's hiding out there in the background. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope you've at least had fun. And, well, I'll keep the fire going, even though it's super warm. You folks have a good sleep.